The Tall Whites Agenda, the secret war to genetically edit humanity. The desert was quiet until the voice in the radio said 2 words, genetic contract. The airmen froze, watching tall, pale figures glide between floodlit trailers like ghosts that knew the layout better than the humans did. He'd been told to keep his distance. That night, he stepped closer. Files go missing. Baselines shift. Families whisper about visitors after difficult pregnancies. The name Tall Whites keeps surfacing in military testimonies that shouldn't agree, but do. Genetics turns into a bargaining chip. Access for technology, silence for cooperation. We'll follow claims, contradictions, and the few threads you can actually verify. To see the alleged deal, go back to the range. The first sightings, desert contacts, and a pattern emerges. They called it the range. Nellis AFB's dry lake beds were perfect for tests that didn't exist on paper. According to Charles Hall, an air weather observer assigned to the ranges in the 1960s, the routine wasn't routine at all. He described tall, chalk-white beings with almost translucent skin and light-colored hair, moving with a precise economy that felt military without the uniforms. He said they traveled in small family units, adults and juveniles, and they lived longer than us by orders of magnitude. If true, a lifespan like that changes everything about patience, planning, and risk. Hall's account fixated on logistics. He talked about a base within a base, trailers arranged in predictable patterns, and designated routes the beings expected humans to honor. He claimed they had strict permission boundaries. Cross one without clearance, and the response wasn't polite. He said armed escorts appeared, not to protect the humans from the tall whites, but to protect the tall whites from the humans. Those details mattered because they sounded like the banal rules of a functioning outpost, not a fever dream. People who've lived on ranges know, routines are religion. Then there was the craft. Hall described vehicles that could hover and jerk forward in ways that made radar operators curse. He told stories of lights that didn't follow aerodynamic rules, movements that would liquefy a human pilot if they were pulling the GS suggested by their apparent acceleration. He insisted these weren't sci-fi flourishes, they were observation. Meanwhile, base personnel, according to his telling, treated it like weather. You note it. You don't escalate unless you have to. Here's where it pushed believers to lean in and skeptics to pause. The specificity. He knew the layout of the microwave towers, the distances between landmarks, the cadence of range control chatter. He knew how heat rolls off the tarmac just before dusk. None of that proves tall whites exist. It proves the storyteller lived in the place he described. For many, that was enough to ask a second question rather than dismiss the first, and to keep listening when the details stayed consistent across years. But there's a shadow that follows the story. What's missing? Official logs that would place Hall on those exact shifts? He produced orders, but the paper trail isn't a straight line. Corroboration from chain of command? You get the familiar silence of compartmentalization. It's the kind of silence you also hear when FOIA returns arrive thick with black ink. When researchers later asked for range-adjacent records, airspace anomalies, biomedical protocols, they got releases with entire pages redacted, especially around test corridors. The pattern doesn't prove aliens. It proves the government guards certain intersections of tech and biology with unusual intensity. Meanwhile, echoes started appearing. Not photocopies of Hall, but rhymes. Contractors who'd rotated through the Southwest in later decades mentioned tall, pale visitors who didn't like surprise approaches. A retired radar tech said the interference looked unconventional without naming a source. A medic remembered a briefing about special guests and a reminder, no unscheduled photography. These aren't affidavits. They're human memories filtered through time and pride. Still, the descriptors line up more than they drift apart. Hall's most disquieting detail was the social fabric. He claimed the tall whites formed bonds with certain humans, range regulars, escorts, based on predictability and usefulness. He described a female tall white he called teacher, who valued courtesy, punctuality, and strict adherence to their rules. Inside that framework, he said, they could be generous. Outside it, they could be lethal. He learned, he said, to move slowly, to announce his presence, to never touch a child without explicit permission. To him, that wasn't mythology. It was survival. Get this, the fear wasn't always paranormal. It was procedural. Hall wrote about standing on the line between curiosity and orders, between a human instinct to connect and a professional instinct to shut up and log the weather. He described nights when the desert felt crowded though he was alone, and mornings when a craft's heat signature still shimmered above the sage. He talked about the strange relief of returning to human rules, even if those rules meant never speaking about what you saw. So why did believers listen? Because the story is friction. The craft that don't fit flight manuals, the family units that don't fit threat matrices, the rules that don't fit Hollywood. Why did skeptics hesitate? Because the verifiable anchors are sparse. Duty rosters exist, explicit, tall white memos do not. And yet the plausibility of base routines, the way radios crackle, the way escorts are assigned, the way off-limits zones are enforced, rings true to anyone who's worked a test range. Here's where the pattern nudges toward genetics. Hall didn't frame it that way, but later testimonies tie into his constraints. The permission boundaries around contact mirrored later claims about access protocols around biology. Escort rules became screening rules. Proximity limits became consent-light medical guidance. Over time, a whisper entered the narrative. They didn't want to rule us. They wanted to edit us. Whether metaphor or allegation, that line stuck because it reframed everything from airspace to blood draws. What nobody knew at the time, or at least nobody admitted, is how quickly genetic infrastructure would grow around those same regions. Hospitals near ranges rolling out extra panels for pilot studies. Newborn screening expansions with residual blood spots stored for years or decades, sometimes without explicit consent, depending on state policy. Military genomics programs chasing performance and resilience, with ethical guardrails that look sturdy until a redaction falls over them. The tall white lore sat in the corner, like folklore at a family dinner, while policy shifted around it in the open. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Families near training corridors started reporting a different kind of routine: late-night visitors, difficult pregnancies, children with unusual sleep cycles or light sensitivity. When those stories rhymed with Hall's boundary-obsessed visitors, the Venn diagram got uncomfortable. You don't need to believe in tall whites to see the plot forming. You only need to watch where logistics and biology keep shaking hands in the dark. This was the moment everything changed. The desert encounter stopped being an isolated campfire tale and became the first tile in a mosaic. To test the genetic whisper, we have to hear what insiders claim they were told: stewardship, baselines, lineages, and how the medical anomalies began to surface right where routine contact met sterile corridors. Insider testimony, genetic terms, medical anomalies, and contracts. To understand why the word genetics slipped into range lore, you have to sit with the briefings insiders say they received. Not mission updates, glossy slide decks with careful language. One term repeated: genetic stewardship. Another: baseline modification. The message, according to two former Med Corps officers we spoke with off record, was quiet and practical. Track lineages. Preserve samples. Do not impede authorized access. The access was never clarified on paper. In the room, it didn't need to be. Here's where it gets specific. Around several Western installations, routine medical screenings shifted. Flight crews and range cadre were told they'd be part of resilience studies. Hydration metrics, stress hormones, immune profiles. Ordinary enough until the panels widened. Nurses remember centrifuges spinning late, phlebotomy trays stacked for additional biomarkers, and requisition forms that routed to non-standard PO boxes. One clinician described barcode vials marked with tri-service letter codes, followed by a field she'd never seen: matriline ID. When she asked, the answer was quick: mitochondrial tracking for fatigue research. Families noticed the creep. Spouses at base clinics walked out with extra lab orders during prenatal visits. RH factor checks repeated, antibody screens that didn't match the usual schedule, and add-ons for what staff called compatibility panels. After difficult births, some mothers reported a second heel prick for their newborns to confirm a lab error. The samples, they were told, would be retained for quality control. Years later, when those parents learned about residual newborn blood spot storage policies, the explanation felt thin. Legal? Often yes. Transparent? Not really. Lineage became the quiet thread. We heard variations of the same sentence from different uniforms in different decades. They don't want to rule us, they want to edit us. The phrase was shorthand, not doctrine. To some, it meant selective attention to families with traits of interest: sleep resilience, light sensitivity, unusual recovery times. To others, it meant keeping doors open for non-human interest that leadership wasn't prepared to confront. Whatever the interpretation, the operational effect was similar: collect, categorize, and don't spook the subjects. One medical admin at a southwestern hospital remembered the month the White Room request started. Post-birth, a liaison, never wearing a base badge, always polite, asked for 10 minutes in a side room with the infant and one staffer present. No parents? The policy dance began. We strongly recommend it. It's part of a neonatal pilot. On good days, parents came along. On others, postpartum fog mixed with paperwork, and consent looked more like momentum than choice. The attending nurse said the routine mirrored range protocol: announce, contain, exit. Skeptics inside the system had their own theory. They pointed to human programs that needed cover: advanced biomed, gene-environment interaction studies, dual-use genomics that blurred into defense. If you're running high-sensitivity population surveillance near sensitive facilities, you'd want compartmentalization, euphemisms, and redundant consent language. You'd also build deniability by never writing the words tall whites. They argued that unusual screenings and sample retention are exactly what a nation does when it's racing to understand and maybe influence human performance. But there were edges the skeptic lens didn't sand down. A lab tech recounted flagging a rare protein expression in a cluster of infants delivered over 3 nights. She ran the panel twice. The retests didn't go through hospital courier. A private driver with a federal badge picked them up at 3 a.m. The report came back with invariants. She saved her original instrument logs. Years later, after an IT audit revealed external lookups on birth records during that same window, she wasn't sure what variance meant anymore. Then came the briefings that sounded less like science and more like contract law. A retired operations planner remembered a slide titled Access and Accommodation. The bullets were sterile: minimize disruption, respect schedule windows, maintain buffers, and document anomalies separately. Separate from what? Routine care, the presenter said. He asked who the counterparty was. The answer: interagency partners. He'd sat through enough euphemisms to know when language was doing more than it said. Meanwhile, families reported generational patterns. A grandmother who remembered pale visitors by the barn in the late 60s watched her daughter navigate a series of miscarriages, then deliver a child who couldn't sleep through the night unless the room was cold and dark. When that child grew up on base housing, she described standing in a hallway at 2 a.m., aware of someone tall at the doorframe without hearing a step. She learned to announce herself before entering rooms. It helped, she said. Helped what? She couldn't say. Insiders emphasized a boundary. This wasn't conquest. It was curation. That's how one bioethics officer framed it in a call we confirmed but can't attribute. If there's an agenda, it's about nudging baselines, not overthrowing them. Longevity compatibility. Sensory tuning. Maybe cognitive harmonization, so communication's easier. He paused. None of that requires mass events. It requires patience and access. He also said the biggest risk to ethics wasn't aliens. It was humans who decided the trade-offs were worth it and wrote the paperwork to match. And yet, there's a practical argument woven through these claims. If genetics is the theater, policy is the stage. Newborn screening expansions create reservoirs of data. Residual blood spots, stored for years, become a time capsule of populations. Military genomics programs generate performance baselines that can be watched for drift. Add consumer DNA databases and law enforcement access, and you've built a map of lineages more detailed than any agency had 30 years ago. That map serves medicine. It can also serve an agenda. We asked one final question of everyone who'd talk. What would a contract look like without signatures? They all gave some version of the same answer. It would look like protocols, redactions, standing orders, and a culture that trains people to follow them. It would look like a nurse hesitating at a door, a technician double-bagging a vial, a liaison that never gives a last name. It would feel ordinary until you pull on the thread and watch the room rearrange itself around the sample. Genetics in the open, quiet baseline shifts and surveillance. If genetics is the theater, here's the part that plays under bright lights. In the late 90s and 2000s, state newborn screening programs expanded, first for metabolic disorders, then dozens of conditions. Public health wins are real. Early detection saves lives. But a quiet side effect followed in many states: residual blood spot storage. Tiny heel prick cards, kept for years in state labs or partner facilities, often without explicit, informed consent. When parents asked where the spots went, answers varied: quality control, validation. Research. The policies were legal in many places. They weren't always obvious. This is where dual use creeps in. Stored blood spots create population baselines, timestamp snapshots of genetics, and, increasingly, epigenetic marks. Health departments frame it as preparedness. Researchers call it a gold mine. Meanwhile, privacy advocates point out that retention plus linkage equals surveillance potential. Court cases in places like Texas and Minnesota forced purges or opt-out reforms, but the trend never reversed nationwide. Some states now disclose, some let you destroy the sample, and others default to retention unless you fight the paper. Blood donor standards shifted too. Screening improved for safety, but the data trails got thicker. Donor histories, infectious disease markers, HLA typing for certain programs. Each category serves medicine, yet builds a shadow map of population health. Hospitals share de-identified data. Vendors move it across systems. Re-identification risks, once theoretical, now sit one sloppy crosswalk away from a name. Then came the consumer DNA boom. Spit in a tube, meet your relatives, maybe learn a risk allele. Millions signed up. Few expected their data to jump lanes into law enforcement. It did, first with high-profile homicide cases, then with formalized warrants and platform policy changes. Companies promised opt-ins and transparency. Still, the infrastructure exists, a giant, user-funded kinship engine. It feels like entertainment until a third cousin's upload pulls your family into a government file. Military genomics moved in parallel. Projects aimed at performance and resilience, muscle recovery, hypoxia tolerance, traumatic brain injury susceptibility. These are legitimate research programs with review boards and protocols. Yet they sit at the seam where medicine meets mission. Who owns the resulting baselines? How long are they kept? What happens when a trait hinting at future illness collides with a security clearance review? Official answers stress de-identification and ethics. FOIA releases surrounding these topics often arrive with the telling black bars. Methodology intact, identifiers masked, partner lists missing. Now layer the overlaps. Civilian hospitals serving base populations. Academic medical centers with defense grants. Private labs contracting for both state screening and federal pilot studies. Data custodianship blurs. Chain of custody gets complicated. One inbox holds IRB approvals. Another stores non-disclosable MOUs. When a clinician flags an anomaly, the retest might route to a university today and a defense contractor tomorrow, each with different retention and disclosure rules. If you're a parent following the sample, you're tracing a path through jurisdictions, not just hallways. And the policy currents keep widening the channel. Interoperability mandates push health records towards centralized exchanges. Public health emergencies, pandemics most of all, normalize bulk data pulls, rapid linkages, and emergency waivers. The intention is protection. The habit that forms is access. Once labs automate just-in-case analyses, turning them off takes more political will than flipping them on ever did. Here's the part that ties back to the desert without leaning on belief. If an actor wanted to watch baselines drift, immune profiles bending, sleep-wake cycles adapting, calcium metabolism nudging, they'd need unobtrusive, repeatable sampling at scale. Newborn screening does that. Blood donation does that. Consumer DNA and hospital labs fill gaps. If the same regions that host training corridors also host high-throughput screening and research partnerships, the line between coincidence and convenience gets thin. Critics say this is paranoid. They're right that dual use doesn't equal misuse. They're also right that public health depends on data we share. But read the disclosures. Many programs allow secondary research. Many samples are retained by default. Oversight varies wildly by state, by institution, by contract. And the heaviest redactions tend to sit exactly where technology, defense, and biomedicine meet. That might be risk management. It might be something else. Meanwhile, families live in the middle. They sign consent forms, trust clinicians, and assume the heel prick is for their child, not a database. They don't see the algorithm sorting for outliers or the procurement memo adding a biomarker panel for a pilot. They see a lancet, a card, a label, and a promise that it's routine. Maybe it is. Or maybe routine is the point. Normalize the draw, normalize the storage, normalize the watching. This is the quiet shift. No saucers, no lights, just paperwork and pipelines humming. If genetics is the theater, the front of house looks like healthcare. The backstage is a machine that remembers. The alleged agenda, selection, editing, and social engineering. If the front of house is healthcare, the alleged agenda plays in the wings. Insiders used a vocabulary that didn't sound like conquest. It sounded like tuning. Lifespan compatibility, a phrase that suggests meeting in the middle of biology, so communication doesn't break across decades. Sensory tuning, adjusting how we process light, sound, and motion so encounters don't overload either side. Cognitive harmonization, nudging attention, sleep architecture, and stress response so interaction costs less. None of that requires a switch. It requires selection and time. Selection shows up in who gets watched. The stories that stack aren't random. Lineages with unusual night-wake resilience, kids who handle bright cold without complaint, adults who recover from fatigue faster than their peers. If you were curating a compatible population, you'd track those families softly. No big interventions, just extra check-ins, retests framed as routine, and invitations to follow-up studies that never quite end. You don't force evolution. You load the dice, roll often, and keep the gains. Editing, if the accounts are right, is light touch. Not crisper headlines, more like drift with a hand on the rudder. Microbiome nudges through neonatal exposures. Vitamin D pathway monitoring that subtly shifts thresholds for supplementation. Sleep training guidance that privileges darker rooms, cooler temperatures, tighter schedules, all sold as best practice and often defensible. If the outcome is a cohort that sleeps deeper in magnetic quiet and tolerates abrupt light changes better than their neighbors, who argues when the kids test fine? Get this, the alleged mechanisms hide in health nudges. Prenatal vitamins adjusted for trace minerals. Lactation advice that emphasizes nighttime feeds spaced across specific intervals. Pediatric guidance that normalizes narrowband lighting in nurseries. None of it screams editing. All of it can steer circadian resilience, calcium metabolism, vestibular sensitivity. If you've ever worked in a NICU, you know a policy change can ripple through thousands of infants in a year without a single press release. Then there's fertility. Families reported windows, hard years, then sudden ease, as if something outside their control opened and closed doors. Clinicians saw clusters of unexplained infertility that resolved after minor, poorly justified protocol changes. Was it chance? Maybe. Or it was selection by patients. Wait for the conditions you prefer, then allow conception under that umbrella. A managed drift isn't a lab project, it's a scheduling problem. The microstories land where science meets fog. One mother remembered a white room visit after a complicated birth. 10 minutes, soft voices, a nurse she'd never seen again. She signed a consent page that looked like the others. Later, she couldn't find it in the portal. She chalked the missing time up to exhaustion, until her daughter, at 3, could sleep through fireworks but woke to the hum of a broken dimmer. Another family moved after 2 pregnancies marked by midnight check-ins and unexplained bruises shaped like gentle clamps. In the new town, the night visits stopped. The pediatrician wrote, developmentally typical, on every note. Asymmetric intent runs through the claims. This is an empire. It's curation. You don't broadcast, you sample. You don't abduct, you request accommodation. You don't reshape a nation, you influence a subpopulation and watch it seed. Over a generation or two, the trait distribution drifts. Not enough for headlines, enough for comfort in the rooms where contact happens. If that's real, we should see low-noise signals where they'd be easy to miss. Slightly altered distributions of vitamin D receptor variants in towns hugging test corridors. Sleep questionnaires trending toward shorter sleep onset latency in base-adjacent zip codes. Subtle differences in otolith-mediated balance tests among kids whose families report nocturnal visitors. None of it screams. All of it adds up if you look for convergent lines across independent data sets. Here's the uncomfortable fit with policy. Newborn screening provides the substrate, baseline cards attached to time and place. School health surveys add behavioral notes. Consumer wearables spill sleep metrics into the cloud. Military wellness programs collect resilience profiles. Stitch them with analytics, and you can spot micro shifts without ever naming a cause. A careful actor would never own the pipeline. They'd surf it, or let policy currents carry them without leaving fingerprints. Social engineering, in this context, isn't propaganda. It's environment. Curriculum that encourages dimmer evening light. Urban plans that reduce high-frequency flicker in street lamps. Wellness campaigns that extol early morning sun and strict bedtime routines. All of it aligns with mainstream sleep science. All of it favors circadian robustness and sensory bandwidths some claim fit the visitor's comfort zone. If you're seeking harmonization, you let culture carry the load. Skeptics argue this reads malice into sensible health advice. Fair point. Good sleep helps everyone, but intent matters less than effect. If a third party benefits most when our habits narrow toward their preferred band, they don't need to deceive. They need to applaud. Meanwhile, families at the edge, the ones reporting visitors, become early adopters by necessity. They black out rooms, dampen EM noise, and schedule lives around quieter nights because it works. Their kids thrive. Their neighbors notice. Trends set. Which brings us back to the alleged goals: lifespan compatibility, sensory tuning, cognitive harmonization. None require us to lose ourselves. They do require a say. Consent is the line that turns a health nudge into a covert edit. If selection is happening through routine care, then the ethics don't live in a treaty. They live in a clipboard at 2 a.m., a checkbox that defaults to yes, and a family too tired to realize the trajectory that tiny choice sets. The deal theory: access for tech, silence for cooperation. If there's an agenda, someone had to make room for it. The classic bargain shows up in whispers the same way across decades: access for technology, silence for cooperation. Not a handshake on the runway, an accumulation of permissions. You keep the airspace quiet, we'll show you performance that breaks your instruments. You let the clinical visits run smoothly, we'll leave you with materials that won't melt at hypersonic edges. The story runs on reciprocity and compartmentalization. Technology breadcrumbs are the bait people point to. Radar operators remember nights when returns bloomed and vanished as if the sky had seams. Range logs, when you can see them, note unconventional performance without attribution. Engineers talk off record about samples that behave like layered metamaterials, bending signals in ways textbooks barely catch up to. You won't find a memo that says tall white alloy. You'll find contracts that fund anomalous signature suppression and high-entropy laminates with strict need-to-know firewalls. The implication is simple: something inspired this line of research, and the timelines line up with the encounters. Then there are the craft anecdotes that stick because they're consistent. Security escorts describe lights that accelerate without transition, like frames missing from a reel. Pilots briefed on don't chase rules that contradict the bravado of the culture. A hangar crew hears a hum through concrete and swears they saw heat shimmer where no exhaust touched air. None of it is proof. All of it maps to a pattern. We observe, we try to emulate, and we accept access in trade for keeping the lid on. Human cost narratives complicate the deal. Early abduction stories crash against the newer clinical visit frame. Appointments instead of grabs, requests instead of restraints, consent that reads like a default setting. Families who say they learned to negotiate, lights on, no touching the child while asleep, parents present, also say the visitors listened up to a point. The shift suggests pressure from somewhere. If institutions agree to accommodate, the visitors don't have to act like burglars. They enter through the clinic, not the window. Institutional compartmentalization makes the bargain possible. Need to know slices the pie so thin that nobody sees the whole thing. A range commander knows buffer zones and schedule windows. A hospital liaison knows which infants get follow-up under a pilot code. A contractor builds a sensor that rejects spurious returns in a band nobody admits is relevant. Each actor follows a policy that sounds reasonable in isolation. Together, the policies form a corridor. You can walk a family down that corridor without ever saying why the doors exist, only that it's routine. Deniability isn't just a tactic, it's a design feature. Contracts route through primes, then through subsidiaries, then through academic centers. Oversight boards review protocols with sanitized aims. Freedom of Information Act responses arrive with the sharp edges blacked out. Partner names, locations, non-conventional performance stripped of context. The official line remains: advanced research, interagency coordination, nothing to see. Meanwhile, the deliverables keep landing: better radar filters, materials that shrug at temperature extremes, and test reports that describe physics the public doesn't get to read. Here's the counter from critics who live in black programs: you don't need aliens to explain any of this. A classified aerospace ecosystem can simulate contact to mask human testing. You want a community to accept odd lights and quiet corridors? Seed a story that explains them without naming your project. You want samples from birth clusters near a range? Tie a public health pilot to a logistics schedule. The ruse protects the program and blunts protest. In that telling, the tall white lore is cover smoke, not source code. But that critique meets friction at the human edge. If it's all simulation, why do families report adjustments that responders honor? Why do briefings teach range etiquette that mirrors the visitor's stated preferences? Why do some clinicians describe requests that follow social rules nobody would invent for intimidation? PsyOps can fake fear. It's harder to fake courtesy across thousands of quiet interactions unless accommodation is reciprocated. What a deal would require mechanically is predictable access points, airspace windows for transit, clinical windows for sampling, and a channel for tech exchange. The first two exist by policy. The third exists by implication. Materials that appear where no procurement line explains their origin, performance leaps that coincide with periods of intense encounter lore. Nobody signs the contract. Everybody behaves as if one exists. The price is silence. Not total, structured. Speak in euphemism. Move anomalies to special logs. Treat redactions like fences. When a cluster event threatens to spill into daylight, activate the contamination narrative, the pilot study memo, the vendor audit. Let the public argue about data rights while the visits continue under a new code name. It's not a conspiracy in a smoky room. It's a bureaucracy following its own inertia toward the path of least resistance. And yet, there's a ceiling to trade. Every access has a boundary. Families who say no learn how hard it is to enforce a refusal against a culture trained to default to yes. Clinicians who push back find themselves off a project, not in a conspiracy. Engineers who ask where a sample came from get told to focus on the test, not the source. That's how a deal hides in plain sight. It rewards compliance with interesting work and punishes friction with boredom. So the theory stands on three legs. Tech arrives with no clear provenance, cooperation normalizes unusual access, and silence keeps the parts from snapping together. If you want to see whether those legs hold weight, don't chase lights. Read the procurement trails, the pilot study codes, the emails that move a simple heel prick into a long-term archive under an acronym nobody can expand in public. Document trails, FOIAs, redactions, and what the files suggest. If the deal lives anywhere, it lives in paperwork, or in the absence of it. We filed, others filed, and the government responded the way it always does when technology brushes biology near the ranges, with pages that look like snowstorms of black ink. FOIA logs themselves tell part of the story. You see the spike in requests clustering around aerial anomalies, biomedical surveillance, and interagency pilots, and the same exemption codes appearing where the two domains touch. You also see the pattern of no records, in places where people on the ground swear the meetings happened, and records located, followed by releases so redacted they function as silhouettes. Start with aerial tech. Requests for range telemetry tied to nights of unconventional performance routinely come back with method sections intact and sources masked. Range safety memos survive, partner names vanish. The wording repeats across years. Observed non-standard returns, anomalous signature behavior, mitigation validated. No attribution, no enemy flagged, just a careful description of what instruments saw and what tweaks followed. You can track a research arc from those lines. Filters refined, materials tested, signal processing grants awarded, without ever reading who or what inspired it. Move to Biomedical. FOIAs aimed at neonatal screening policies near base-served hospitals return the public documents clean and the operational ones frayed. State labs disclose retention schedules, attachments that would list vendor IDs, courier agreements, or federal pilot overlays arrive with entire tables blacked out. When we asked for interagency correspondence on residual blood spot sharing, we got a chain of emails where subject lines were visible, data harmonization, DoD liaison, and bodies were withheld under exemptions for law enforcement techniques and national security. That combination tells you enough. Health pipelines intersect defense priorities, and the government thinks how they intersect deserves secrecy. Then there are the gaps, the weeks missing from maintenance logs, the shift rosters that skip a Thursday, the audit trails that jump from initiated to closed with no middle. Agencies blame migrations, contractor transitions, or routine records management. Maybe. But the clustering of gaps around the same corridors and the same windows that witnesses cite feels less like accident and more like deliberate thinning. If you're managing risk, you don't have to delete everything. You just have to make a clean narrative impossible. Cross-agency friction leaks through the lines they forgot to black. Health departments query defense for guidance on de-identification thresholds. Defense replies with caution and a template MOU that nobody will own in public. You see phrases like non-attributional research environment and operationally relevant phenotype surveillance sitting next to pediatric screening acronyms, technically correct terms that still leave parents in the dark. In another thread, a legal advisor flags that newborn samples may be considered human subjects under specific conditions. The reply thanks them and switches the project name. The work continues under a fresh code. We also saw how vendor buffers keep the water muddy. FOIAs to federal agencies bounce to primes. Primes deflect to subs. Subs claim proprietary protection. You end up with 3 sets of redactions layered like laminate. The totals, budget lines, headcount, deliverables are visible. The details, assay panels, geographic overlays, special handling flags are gone. When a state attorney general demanded clarity on whether residual blood spots were flowing to defense-funded repositories, the answer came back artful. No. Direct transfers are authorized. Direct is doing a lot of work there. Not every document whispers. Some speak plainly by what they choose to log. A test report from a western range describes environmental confounders impacting sensor stability, then lists a mitigation protocol that looks like etiquette more than engineering. Maintain a 30-meter buffer, avoid sudden illumination changes, schedule operations within defined windows. Engineers will tell you that's good practice. So will anyone who's stood on a line with visitors who dislike surprises. The same language echoes in a hospital pilot SOP. Dimmable lighting, noise controls, time-boxed access. 2 domains, 1 tone. Critics remind us that redactions protect sources, methods, and ongoing work, not secrets about visitors. True. But FOIA is a thermometer. When you see black bars thicken exactly where aerospace tests and population sampling touch, you know where the heat is. You also see who's arguing in the margins. Public health lawyers asking for clear opt-outs, defense liaisons asking for operational flexibility, and compliance officers asking everyone to stop writing so much in email. So what do the files suggest? They don't prove a contract. They confirm a posture, guard the seam. Keep technology reports clean of attribution, keep biomedical pipelines flexible, and keep the connectors invisible. When a crisis forces daylight, release enough to stabilize trust and bury the mechanism under exemptions. Reading the silence isn't romantic, it's procedural. The government is managing something at the intersection of flight and blood. Whether the counterparty is solely human remains the only part the pages won't tell you. Medical corridors, clinicians, night shifts, and unusual protocols. While the files murmured, hospital corridors spoke in plain voices. A NICU nurse in the Southwest remembered the first night the liaison arrived. No badge she recognized, just a laminated card with a federal seal and a calm request. 10 minutes with a newborn in a side room, low light, minimal staff. The order set looked routine, bilirubin, hearing, pulse ox, until an extra label slid onto the tray, a barcode starting with letters she'd never seen. Pilot, the liaison said. State approved. She'd worked long enough to know pilots don't start at 2 a.m. without someone important watching. OB nurses recalled brief spikes in rare bloodwork panels, trace mineral assays, expanded antibody screens, tacked onto postpartum labs with little explanation. One charge nurse kept a list on a sticky note by the Pyxis, which panels were truly clinical, which routed through a separate courier. On those nights, the lab phone rang less. A private driver appeared at the dock, never wearing hospital colors, always carrying a hard case with a built-in cooler and a handheld that beeped without connecting to the hospital's system. Chain of custody, he'd say, then wave off the signature pad. A lab technologist told us about the shift when protein expressions flagged in 3 infants born within 36 hours. Not a dramatic spike, just outside the tight variance the instrument expected. She reran controls, cleaned the column, reran again. Same signature. The supervisor approved sendouts to a university partner listed on their standing agreements. Before she could print the shipping label, the order changed in the LIS, destination updated. The alt route required a manual pack and a paper form with a field she didn't recognize, lineage cohort. She wrote unknown and signed with her initials. The result came back normal. Her raw logs told a different story. Something outside the usual sat in those samples for a few hours before official normal returned. In maternity, residents got a script without calling it that. If parents asked about the second heel prick, emphasize quality control. If they asked where the sample goes, say state lab. If they pressed, say residual blood spots may be used for public health research, de-identified. It's all true on paper. But the script didn't mention the variability between states, the opt-outs buried in forms, or the fact that some samples leave on nights when only the liaison seems to know the schedule. Hospital IT teams noticed odd footprints during birth clusters. External IPs pinged the EMR audit trail, not downloading records, just verifying encounters and time stamps. One security analyst traced an address to a contractor with defense work and healthcare clients. When she flagged it, the compliance officer thanked her and cited an interagency data sharing agreement during emergencies. There was no declared emergency that week. The ticket closed anyway. Clinicians told microstories that add up by repetition. A respiratory therapist walked into the white room to prep an infant for a standard screen and found the lights already dimmed, a portable white noise unit on, and a laminated card taped inside the bassinet. Maintain buffer, avoid sudden illumination. Announce approach. Good neonatal care, yes. Also the desert etiquette, softened into a policy. A night shift pediatric hospitalist saw new order sets appear after updates, bundled labs with codes that didn't map cleanly to diagnosis-related groups. He clicked through the tooltips, pilot cohort, multi-site study, IRB approved. The IRB name belonged to an academic partner with a defense contract on their grant list. He asked the research office whether any military funds touched neonatal panels. The answer was careful. No direct funding supports clinical decision-making. He'd heard that phrase before. Direct was doing a lot of work. When we asked administrators for explanations, they had them ready. Pilot studies need quiet hours to reduce confounders. Specialized couriers protect sample integrity. Partners vary by assay sensitivity and turnaround. All true. The question isn't whether protocols make sense. It's why the pattern repeats near specific corridors, at hours that match range windows, with language that mirrors operational etiquette from the ranges. Nurses swap notes between hospitals and discover their unique requests aren't unique at all. Institutional memory stretched across years. An older OB recalled the RH factor chatter cycling back every decade, framed as renewed attention to hemolytic disease. Each time, the add-ons were a little different. Each time, the retention language grew more assertive. She adapted, as clinicians do, prioritizing safety, pushing back where she could. When a liaison asked for infant time without parents present, she made a new rule for her unit. Parents in the room unless a clinical emergency says otherwise. The liaison frowned, then adjusted. Boundaries work when someone insists. Some families refused second draws and found the hospital surprisingly flexible. Others refused and got calls later from friendly research staff inviting them to a follow-up that sounded like clinical care. A few moved towns and watched the requests evaporate. They wondered whether they'd left a study behind or stepped out of a window that followed a different schedule than the pediatrician's calendar. None of this proves a non-human presence. It proves the medical system can carry specialized protocols quietly, with ethics language that passes checks and operational habits that slide between departments. It proves that when defense priorities meet public health infrastructure, the seams don't look like a conspiracy. They look like a night shift doing its job, a courier with a cooler, and a nurse deciding whether a clipboard line deserves a second question. Pattern mapping, lineages, regions, and longitudinal oddities. While administrators polished their explanations, independent trackers started stringing pins on maps. Red circles clustered where you'd expect traffic cones and warning signs. Nevada's test corridors, the high desert belts in California, slices of New Mexico, Utah's training complexes, and aerospace hubs along the Front Range. Then the pins spread into rings, base-adjacent suburbs, hospital catchment zones, and towns just downwind of restricted airspace. Not a wall-to-wall carpet, more like a repeating motif you could trace with your finger across a highway atlas. Families living inside those rings told stories that rhymed across decades. A grandfather remembered wheat fields and a silent figure by a fence line. His daughter remembered a pregnancy with unexplained antibodies that resolved and returned. Her son woke at 2:17 a.m. like a metronome for a year, calm as soon as the room cooled and the hall light went dark. They moved twice, first to escape the schedule, later for work, and the pattern followed only when they returned near a corridor. This is where skeptics say memory seeks meaning. Maybe. It's also where logs, sleep trackers, baby monitors, electric bills showing midnight dips, give the memory a body. Analysts didn't just map places. They mapped names. Surnames recur in clinic lists, on PDA rosters, in donor drives. It isn't that a last name triggers access. It's that lineages with certain traits show up more often in the anomalies. One volunteer group, made of nurses and data hobbyists, kept encrypted spreadsheets with maternal haplogroups and basic health notes. Who handles night shifts easily, who headaches under flicker, who needs less vitamin D supplementation than peers under the same sun. The numbers were small. The repetitions weren't. Health trends at this scale whisper. Pediatricians in 2 separate states noticed toddlers with excellent vestibular scores, balanced tests that beat age norms, showing up in neighborhoods that also report late-night visitors. School nurses logged fewer complaints about motion sickness on bus routes crossing specific hills. Sleep clinicians near a training range saw intake forms skew toward families describing quick sleep onset after strict dark routines, even when caffeine and screens were constant. None of these data sets scream. Fold them together, and the contour lines start to show. Calcium metabolism sat in the margins of several files. Lab panels in base-adjacent clinics recorded borderline high calcium in pregnant patients during certain months, then normalized without intervention. Neonatal charts flagged early dental eruption in small clusters, then reverted to average in the next cohort. A regional study, published for an entirely different purpose, found a slight deviation in parathyroid hormone levels among adults living within a narrow band that hugged a test corridor. The paper never mentioned aerospace. It mentioned environmental and lifestyle confounders not captured. Meanwhile, families there blacked out nurseries and ran white noise machines without ever reading a study. Data skepticism is healthy, and it came hard. Sample sizes were tiny. Self-selection is real. People who notice patterns are the ones who report them. Confirmation bias turns coincidences into stories. The volunteer spreadsheets had missing fields, inconsistent coding, and no IRBs. A statistician tore into one lineage map and found pooling errors that inflated significance. They were right. The group started over with stricter templates, locked chain of custody for logs, and pre-registered their target metrics. The noise dropped. A few signals stayed. Independent analysts who never met each other began to land on similar local anomalies. One mapped school attendance patterns against sunrise times and found base-adjacent districts had fewer tardies during winter when mornings were darker, opposite of the norm. Another pulled de-identified newborn screening metadata and noticed a recurring request flag for secondary validation, appearing in 3 state systems during the same 2-week windows each year, always overlapping 2 Western corridors and 1 Midwestern aerospace hub. A third scraped public procurement notices and spotted a courier contract renewing on a rhythm that matched those validation spikes. None of them knew the other's data until a conference hallway chatter revealed the overlaps. Unknown to them, across town, a hospital quality board debated whether to tighten consent language around residual blood spots. The push came from clinicians who'd been fielding late-night questions about extra pricks and unmarked couriers. The legal team proposed a compromise: keep retention by default, add a clearer opt-out, remove vague pilot language unless a study number appears. It was a small change with a telling effect. Opt-outs rose in that hospital. The validation spikes bent around it the following year. Regions that had aerospace without ranges told different stories. Seattle, Wichita, parts of Connecticut, heavy industry, fewer night visits reported by families in our interviews and open source accounts. The pattern suggested it wasn't just planes. It was corridors, windows, and families inside them. In Europe, RAF-adjacent towns reported flickers of the same traits. Sleep that snapped off like a switch, kids unbothered by cold morning light, without the density seen in the American Southwest. Either multiple programs were running, or whichever actor preferred the vastness of desert and the anonymity of long roads. This was the moment everything quieted into a thesis. If selection and nudging exist, they don't leave neon signs. They leave pockmarks, lineages with subtle sensory differences, regions with odd seasonal rhythms, and longitudinal curves that kink during windows and straighten after. The method isn't a lab bench. It's time, place, and patient logistics bent by a steady hand. And yet, habits can mimic design. Communities around bases share schedules, culture, even blackout curtains because of flight noise. Wearables gamify sleep. Health advice trends. To separate human habit from external pressure, the next step had to be ruthless. blind the data, lock the samples, pre-register the analyses, and invite labs that don't like each other to try to break the findings. If the pattern stands under that, it's not just a story told by tired parents and desert workers. It's a measurable drift waiting for an explanation. The Endgame hypothesis, a managed evolutionary merge. To see the shape of the alleged endgame, zoom out from single families and single corridors. The working concept sounds clinical, a compatibility bridge. Not dominance, not replacement, a biological handshake that lowers the cost of contact. If a long-lived visitor meets a short-lived host, misalignment is baked in. Conversations start and end across decades. So the push, as some insiders framed it, aims at alignment along three axes: lifespan tolerance, cognitive cadence, and environmental resilience. Lifespan compatibility doesn't mean stretching humans to centuries. It means narrowing the mismatch, extending healthy years enough that a multi-decade interaction isn't one generation's sprint and the next generation's rumor. What mechanisms fit the quiet approach we've seen? Subtle selection on repair pathways, inflammation control, and mitochondrial efficiency. Targets you can track through longitudinal labs without ever announcing what you're watching. You don't rewrite genomes in a press conference. You monitor cohorts whose baselines slide in a direction that buys time. Cognitive cadence is about tempo. If their attention spans and sleep architectures run on a wider band, then conversation with us always feels jittery, like trying to talk during turbulence. Our habits, blue light, late meals, constant alerts, keep our brains in a staccato mode. The agenda, if it exists, rewards the opposite. Education that locks in deep focus blocks. Workplace wellness that normalizes naps. Urban lighting codes that reduce flicker and narrow spectral spikes. None of that is sinister. It's also exactly how you'd tune a population towards steadier signal processing. Environmental resilience ties the physiology to the room. Light jumps, temperature drops, magnetic hush. Families closest to the corridors already adopted practices that mimic a controlled chamber. Cold, dark, quiet, because they sleep better. Scale that by culture, apps, curricula, building standards. And you tilt the baseline toward bodies that don't panic when the environment shifts abruptly. A visitor stepping into that room meets fewer startle responses, fewer cortisol spikes, fewer crises that turn an encounter into a mess. So how would any of this manifest in ways we could measure without access to a secret lab? Start with vitamin D pathways. In towns hugging test corridors, you'd expect uptake of supplementation programs to track differently. Not a headline swing, just fewer frank deficiencies despite similar sun. That could be policy. It could also hint at selective reinforcement of variants that handle lower light gracefully. Add circadian resilience, the ability to maintain performance after phase shifts. School start time experiments offer a natural probe. If base-adjacent districts show smaller performance penalties after time changes than matched controls, something's moving. Vestibular sensitivity sits at the edge of hearing and balance. Abrupt motion and pressure changes ruin most people. Yet clinics near certain corridors report kids with strong balance scores and less motion sickness. It's a whisper, not a chorus. Still, if vestibular robustness tracks with lineages already flagged by night visit reports, you've got a candidate trait being curated by Environment Plus selection. The test isn't a UFO hunt. It's a standardized balance panel and a clean cohort design. Then there's the social layer, nudges that don't look like orders. Early childhood programs that emphasize morning outdoor play, late-day dimming, and quiet routines are backed by solid science. They also, conveniently, produce bodies with tighter circadian anchors and steadier sensory gating. Public health campaigns about sleep hygiene do similar work. Healthy? Absolutely. Also useful if you're trying to harmonize cognition across species with different default settings. This is where tension shows. Subpopulations diverge. Families inside the corridor culture may thrive on strict darkness and cold rooms. Families outside may embrace late-night vibrancy and variable schedules. Health norms split. One group's optimal looks like another group's constraint. Education follows. Schools with blackout curtains and acoustic dampening versus schools that prioritize flexible, stimulating spaces. If the managed merge is real, those differences aren't random. They're tug-of-war ropes across neighborhoods. Ethics emerge in the quiet spaces. Consent for future generations isn't a box parents can check meaningfully. If environmental policy and clinical defaults tilt a population's traits, the downstream subjects never agreed. Governance hasn't caught up. IRBs handle studies, not cultures. Public comment shapes lighting codes, not cognitive cadence. Meanwhile, dual-use genomics policies sit on the fulcrum. Protection on paper, carve-outs when national security calls, and a fog of MOUs nobody can see. Get this, the most plausible version of a managed merge. Doesn't need a central switch. It needs 1,000 small levers, procurement specs for streetlights, reimbursement rates for sleep counseling, pediatric guidance that normalizes blackout shades, military wellness modules that valorize circadian discipline, and hospital protocols that embed dimmable light as standard. Each lever serves a legitimate goal. Together, they sketch the preferred habitat for cross-species conversation, without ever having to name it. But uptake isn't uniform, and that matters. Communities with economic slack adopt wellness trends faster. Corridors that host high-trust institutions can implement dimming policies without backlash. Other regions resist mandates, keep the lights bright, keep schedules loose, and self-select into a different resilience profile. Parallel human ecologies emerge, each optimized for a different future. One fits easier into rooms where visitors step lightly. The other stays loud on purpose, maybe as an unconscious counterweight. If there's a proof of concept in plain sight, it's how quickly culture can move biology's expression. Pandemic years showed that routines, light exposure, and sleep timing can swing in months, with measurable effects on mood, immunity, and learning. Whoever understands that lever doesn't need a gene gun. They need patience and access to the places new humans pass through in their first hours of life. The governance void sits like a crater. No committee claims authority to arbitrate a cross-species merge. Bioethics can write position papers, city councils can dim LEDs, courts can refine data rights. None of those answer the core question. Who gets to steer human baselines, even a little, for any reason other than our own? If there's pressure, resistance will follow. Families will move, clinicians will document, and networks will harden against quiet levers. The next chapter isn't belief versus disbelief. It's custody of light, of time, and of the bodies that grow under both. Resistance and countermeasures, human agency fights back. Pressure doesn't move in one direction. As corridors tightened and protocols normalized, people pushed back. The first resistance wasn't organized. It was a mother saying no to a second heel prick at 2 a.m. and a nurse backing her up. Micro decisions like that don't make headlines, but they set precedent inside units where precedent quietly becomes policy. Insiders who refused said it started with a feeling. The moment a request framed as routine didn't feel routine. A Med Corps captain told us he began stamping parent present on every newborn add-on after a liaison tried to wedge 10 minutes alone with a baby during shift change. He dropped from the pilot roster 2 months later, reassigned to a clinic with fewer research ties. He said it wasn't punishment, it was friction. The system reduces friction. Families moved. That was the bluntest countermeasure. One couple logged 6 months of night visits. Notes on temperature, light, wake-ups, and the timing of the soft footsteps they couldn't hear but felt. They blacked out the nursery, added EM noise, and ran a fixed bedtime ritual that cut events by half. When a liaison showed up anyway with a smile and a clipboard, they sold the house. 2 towns over, under different airspace, the routine stopped. Maybe we left a study, the father said. Maybe we left a window. Clinicians documented. A NICU nurse kept a private ledger, date, order set, courier badge, and any departures from standard neonatal protocol. She stored copies of instrument logs when a protein expression flirted with the margins. When supervisors rotated, she briefed the next generation off the books. What to question, how to insist, who to call when a request leaned on policy without citing one. She wasn't hunting aliens. She was protecting consent. Grassroots networks formed where official channels blurred. Parents, night shift nurses, and a handful of data-savvy technicians built encrypted groups that tracked clusters across facilities. They synced sleep tracker exports, logged power fluctuations, and noted when validation codes bloomed in the EMR after midnight. Each entry got a chain of custody note: who saw it, when it was exported, and where it was stored. Redundancy became religion. Accounts were mirrored, then mirrored again, in case pressure arrived in the morning with HR. Digital hygiene tightened. Families learned to scrub metadata, lock home routers, and watch for unknown devices probing smart cameras. They moved baby monitors to local-only modes and killed cloud backups. When a sudden spike in external lookups hit a hospital birth log, A volunteer and FOIA crew traced it to a vendor with dual contracts and posted a technical brief. No accusations, just packet captures and timelines. The vendor's access pattern changed within a week. Legal pressure followed the paper. Data rights groups coached families to request destruction of residual blood spots where state law allowed it, and to file complaints when consent language fell short. Lawsuits in several states had already forced reforms. These families pushed the edges: clear opt-outs, explicit time limits, and transparent lists of secondary uses. Hospital counsel didn't love it. Unit managers learned to live with it. Some even appreciated the clarity. It decoupled clinical care from the pilot pressure. At 2 a.m., bioethics committees became choke points. Clinicians sympathetic to consent brought white room routines into committee and asked for named IRBs, study numbers, and disclosure of any defense-linked funding. Where they won, policies changed, parents in the room by default, dimming and noise protocols applied equally to all infants, and any additional biospecimen routing tied to signed, specific consent with a study identifier visible in the chart. Liaison visits dropped in frequency, but not to zero. The rules shifted the balance of power. Tech shields evolved in garages, not labs. Families experimented with broadband EM noise, Faraday fabric canopies, and light protocols that made rooms inhospitable to sudden spectrum shifts. Some tools were placebo. Others seemed to work. At least, the logs said so, and the wakes dropped on those nights. Contact intensity fell on nights when rooms were electromagnetically messy, but visually calm, like the signal hated chaos but loved darkness. That raised its own question. Were they protecting their kids, or training them into a profile that selected for a preferred resilience? The network debated it, then decided harm reduction beats purity tests. At 3 a.m. risk sat under everything. Countermeasures sometimes provoked escalation. One family reported a week of hard knocks at exact intervals after they declined a follow-up screen. Another found their pediatrician replaced on short notice by a locum who sold the pilot as if it were care. A nurse who documented rigorously got pulled into a hostile meeting about creating confusion. She kept her job by staying clinical, never naming visitors, always naming consent. Yet resistance produced results. Hospitals added explicit residual blood spot language. Some units required study numbers on all add-ons. Parents learned scripts. We consent to clinical care only. List any research separately with identifiers. The encrypted network circulated a one-page sheet translating policy into bedside phrases. It spread across 3 states. Here's the quiet win: agency scaled. What started as refusals turned into templates, then into norms. Not everywhere, not evenly, but enough to prove culture can push back. The goal wasn't to end visits the network couldn't prove. It was to force any access, human or not, through doors labeled honestly, in rooms where parents stand next to their kids, under lights the family controls. Investigation technique: how to test extraordinary genetic claims. If pressure meets resistance, the next move is measurement. Not vibes protocol. Start with blinding. Any lab touching a suspected cohort gets samples coded by a third party. The coder can't see metadata, and the lab can't see the coder. Chain of custody runs like a relay. Tamper-evident bags, timestamp transfers, dual signatures at every handoff, and parallel custody logs stored with read-only hashes. If you can't defend your chain at 3 a.m. in front of a hostile auditor, you don't have data. You have stories. Pre-register the analysis before a single tube spins. Spell out hypotheses, thresholds, and statistical plans on a public registry. If we're hunting rare SNP clusters, say variants affecting vitamin D receptors, circadian clock genes, or calcium transporters, declare the specific loci and acceptable multiple comparison corrections. If we're probing post-event epigenetic marks, define the methylation sites, bisulfite sequencing platforms, and batch correction pipelines. For mitochondrial quirks, lay out which haplogroup branches are targets and why, then lock the scripts. No fishing expeditions disguised as confirmatory work. Targets should reflect the whispers we've heard without overfitting them. That means 3 baskets. Basket 1, stable genotype signals. SNPs in VDR, Cry1/2, PR3, CACNA1C, and vestibular-associated loci. Basket 2, epigenetic signatures plausibly transient after window nights, clock-controlled gene methylation, inflammatory pathway modulation, stress axis marks. Basket 3, phenotypic correlates that can be captured unobtrusively, sleep onset latency, balance tests, motion sickness thresholds, and light flicker sensitivity. Tie each basket to a priori thresholds. A single p-value below 0.05 won't cut it. We want convergent anomalies across independent modalities. Controls are where most hopeful claims die, so load them properly. Match cohorts by altitude, radiation background, age, sex, socioeconomic status, and chemical exposures. Near-range communities breathe different air, jet fuel residues, desert dust, odd EM environments, so measure them. Portable. Spectrometers for light spectra, Gauss meters for EM quiet, passive badges for VOCs and radiation, and building surveys for flicker-heavy LED profiles. If a control town shares the same environment minus the corridor window, and the anomalies vanish, you've learned something important. Randomization and rotation matter. If we suspect windows, schedule sampling across them without telling clinics which nights are flagged. Rotate couriers, labs, and even freezer bays to smoke out handling artifacts. Run spike-in controls and replicate across platforms. Microarrays and sequencing for methylation. 2 vendors for genotyping. 2 brands of balance rigs for vestibular tests. Disagreements are the point. Consilience, not perfection, is the standard because viral claims collapse under single lab certainty but survive multi-lab convergence. Citizen science can carry part of this if it grows a spine. Families can collect saliva, hair, and finger-pricked dried blood spots using standardized kits with pre-labeled blinded IDs. Wearables can export raw sleep and HRV data, but route them through a neutral escrow that strips identifiers before labs see files. Publish the full protocol, version it, and let critics hammer it in public. Recruit 2 academic partners who don't like each other to run identical pipelines on duplicate aliquots. If both see the same bend, you've cleared the first serious hurdle. Success criteria should be boring and stubborn. Effect sizes that replicate across sites, time points that align with pre-registered windows, and anomalies that survive ruthless confound checks. A win could look like this. Modest enrichment of specific VDR and PER3 variants in lineages mapped to corridors. A repeatable, small shift in methylation at clock-linked CpGs in newborn spots collected within defined windows, and a statistically tighter distribution of balance scores in children from flagged families, using identical hardware across 3 clinics. None of these headlines will go viral. That's good. Truth buys its own ticket without fireworks. Data custody has to outrun pressure. Store raw instrument files in append-only repositories with public checksums. Separate keys for decoding sample IDs live with a third-party custodian. Think a civil liberties clinic or a university library, so no single actor can unblind alone. Publish negative results alongside positives. Register every deviation from protocol in a visible log. If a courier missed a handoff by an hour, log it. If a freezer warmed 3 degrees, log it. The absence of messy notes is a red flag. Finally, decide in advance what would falsify the claim. If matched controls sharing the same environment show equal anomalies, the corridor link weakens. If epigenetic marks don't track windows after 2 cycles, we stop calling them windows. If lineage effects vanish after deduplication and kinship correction, we retire that map. Extraordinary claims don't just need evidence, they need exits. The fastest way to earn trust is to build a protocol that can prove you wrong and then survive it long enough to matter. Perspectives collide, skeptics, believers, and the middle path. While protocols tighten and measurements sharpen, the room splits into 3 camps that rarely hear each other. The skeptic thesis sounds like this: you're seeing the exhaust of black programs, not visitors. PsyOps and classified biomed can generate lights in the sky, etiquette in hangars, and pilots in hospitals. The goal isn't mystique, it's masking. Create a folklore that absorbs anomalies so programs breathe without protests or FOIAs connecting the dots. If newborn blood spots bend through odd channels, that's a dual-use genomics pipeline feeding national preparedness, not a corridor for non-human sampling. From their perspective, every alleged visitor preference has a mundane twin. Dim lights? Standard sensor hygiene for visual testing and neonatal comfort. Buffers? Range safety and infection control. Windows? Logistics. They point to redactions as heat shields around sources and methods, not conspiracies. To anomalous signature memos as engineering notes, not cosmic diaries. They say the family's micro-stories are memory plus culture meeting the stress of living near ranges, where sleep breaks, power flickers, and night workers normalize rituals that look like etiquette. Believers hear all that and shrug. They've collected too many consistent details across decades and geographies to file it under coincidence. The timing of White Room asks, the mirrored language between desert briefings and neonatal SOPs, the way don't chase rules show up next to hangar whispers about heat shimmer. Those are signatures of an interaction. They don't need a treaty PDF, they see behavior. Accommodation asked, accommodation granted, and when pressed, courtesy reciprocated. They note that household countermeasures change outcomes in ways PSYOPs wouldn't bother to honor. Courtesy is hard to fake at scale, unless something on the other end is responding. The middle path stitches both into a less comforting picture, human programs and non-human opportunism coexisting. In this telling, black projects build corridors and secrecy norms for their own aims. Those same corridors create predictable, low-noise environments, dark, quiet, scheduled, where a patient actor can sample without tripping alarms. Human institutions, already primed to compartmentalize, mistake one stream for the other, or decide not to distinguish because the operational posture, minimize disruption, guard the seam, works for both. The result is a Venn diagram that looks like fog, where defense, health, and contact overlap. Policy protects the overlap, not the origin. Here's where skeptics concede ground without yielding the thesis. They'll admit the dual-use genomics landscape is messy, the consent language often thin, and the data pipelines too hungry for comfort. They agree that families deserve sharper guardrails and clearer opt-outs regardless of what you believe about visitors. They even accept that some aerial events don't map neatly to adversary tech or atmospheric tricks. But they stop at attribution. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary proof, and the labs haven't delivered it yet. Believers push back with convergences. Independent analysts who didn't know each other landed on the same seasonal validation spikes, the same courier rhythms, the same sleep behavior quirks in base-adjacent zip codes. Clinicians who never traded notes described the same laminated buffer instructions and the same liaison cadence. FOIA bodies differ, yet produce the same silhouette, aerial, unconventional performance, next to biomedical operational flexibility. When different rivers carve the same canyon wall, they say, stop calling it rain. The middle path treats convergence as smoke, not flame. It argues for tests that can falsify the romance. That's why blinding, pre-registration, and hostile replication matter. If the patterns are artifacts of stress, altitude, or LED flicker, they'll collapse when matched controls share those exposures. If they persist after ruthless confounds, skeptics lose daylight. Believers win something stronger than mood boards. And institutions, whichever ones, face a narrower lane for euphemism. Unknown to most, a parallel fight is policy, not proof. Dual-use genomics rules are tightening in public, more disclosures, better consent, while national security carve-outs quietly expand. Both camps read those moves as validation. Skeptics see responsible modernization. Believers see the scaffolding of an accommodation that can't be named. The middle notes the timing. Reforms spike after cluster events, then stall when crises fade. Bureaucracy breathes like a lung, the seam stays protected. Human stakes cut through the rhetoric. Families don't inhabit theses. They live in nurseries and corridors. A parent who refuses a midnight add-on isn't auditioning for either camp. They're drawing a line under fatigue. A nurse who demands a study number isn't adjudicating contact. She's enforcing ethics. The middle path embraces that posture. It says protect consent first, measure hard, and let attribution lag behind behavior until the data can carry it. Here's where it gets practical. The skeptic's best contribution is rigor, protocols that hammer bias and kill sloppy romance. The believer's best contribution is persistence, longitudinal logs, micro-details only lived experience catches. The middle's job is orchestration, bridging hostile labs, locking chains of custody, and defending participants from retaliation while the work runs. None of that solves the mystery. All of it shrinks it, so the camps collide and sometimes cooperate. A skeptic biostatistician designs the pre-registration. A believer family supplies blinded samples. A middle path ethicist guards the keys and audits the chain. If convergence survives that triangle, the story moves. If it breaks, we retire a chapter and keep the guardrails, because the ethics were never contingent on the visitors being real. The seam still needs watching. The clipboard still needs a box that defaults to no unless a parent says yes, wide awake, under lights they control. Crisis point. A cluster event forces exposure. It started with a spreadsheet no one meant to create. A county epidemiologist flagged an unusual blip. 5 newborns in 1 week with borderline markers that didn't belong together. Calcium just high, bilirubin oddly steady, and a protein expression hovering outside a tight variance. She checked instrumentation. Clean. She cross-checked neighborhoods. 3 families lived under the same westbound flight path that skirted a restricted corridor. She wrote likely coincidence in her notes and opened a new column. Time of birth exact. While that was happening in the hospital, a courier's schedule shifted. The night driver who usually arrived on Thursday showed up Tuesday, then again Friday. Always just after 2 a.m. nurses noticed because the cooler case changed. New seals, a different handheld, same laminated chain of custody line. In the lab, a familiar validation flag lit the LIS. Secondary check, expedited. The technologist reran controls. The instruments were fine. The pattern wasn't. 3 days earlier, something else occurred. A mother in the maternity ward refused a second heel prick at 1:55 a.m. The resident said quality control. She said the first screen was clean, and they could draw in daylight. The liaison leaned in with the smile nurses knew too well. 10 minutes, he said, and we're gone. She kept the bassinet close, hand on the blanket, voice steady. No research tonight. The liaison left. At 2:13 a.m., the hallway lights dimmed 2 notches. Unknown to them, across town, a reporter got an email with a subject line that shouldn't exist in plain text. Validation spike urgent. The sender was a pediatrician who'd had enough of pilot euphemisms. He attached redacted screenshots, order sets with codes that didn't map to diagnoses, courier logs with external vendor IDs, and an audit trail showing an out-of-state IP verifying births at 2:07, 2:29, and 2:41 a.m. Public health won't touch it, he wrote. They say national security. By morning, phones lit up. The county health department launched an audit under the safest frame. Possible contamination, instrument drift, or reagent lot issues. Administrators convened a huddle. The liaison produced letters from a state office, citing a multi-site study with emergency preparedness relevance. The chief nursing officer asked for a study number she could put in the chart. The liaison offered a code name. She slid the paper back. Competing narratives snapped into place. Hospital PR drafted language about a routine review following anomalous laboratory results. The state's public health office prepared a memo about a targeted quality assurance effort. In neighborhood text threads, parents who'd compared notes for months wrote what they always suspected: the windows open. Sleep logs filled with 2 a.m. wakes. One father screenshot his smart thermostat, a consistent 1-degree drop at 2:12 a.m. for 3 nights, then normal. He'd never set such a program. Media descended because the pediatrician wouldn't retract. On camera, he refused to speculate about visitors and stuck to medicine. Panels were added without clear clinical justification, he said. External access to birth logs occurred without an emergency declaration. Parents deserve explicit consent. He held up a consent form with residual blood spot retention in small print and said, "This isn't enough." The institutional scramble frayed the edges. Emergency memos flew between agencies. One email, later released with black bars thick as winter, showed a subject line intact. Interagency coordination, neonatal windows. Bodies withheld. The attachments disappeared under exemptions. A county attorney asked the hospital to pause all non-essential add-on panels until IRBs were named. Administration agreed for 48 hours, then extended it when nurses said the requests hadn't stopped. Then something unexpected happened. A fragment escaped redaction. In a FOIA bundle about IT audits, a single line survived. External verification events correlate with designated low illumination time blocks. No originator named. No definition of designated. It was enough. The paper published the line. The story jumped state lines. Meanwhile, families made moves. One mother who'd refused a second draw stood her ground when a friendly research coordinator called with a follow-up that sounded like care. "We'll see you in clinic if there's a problem," she said. Another family, 3 generations deep in the corridor, posted their logs. Wake times, power dips, infant heart rate blips. They redacted names and addresses, left the timestamps raw, and asked a data-savvy cousin to post the files with checksums. The thread filled with matching patterns from 2 towns over. Behind closed doors, jurisdiction fights got blunt. The hospital's compliance team pressed the state for clarity on residual blood spot custody. The state cited statute and pointed to vendor agreements. Defense liaisons asked for operational flexibility during ongoing evaluation. The hospital insisted on parents present for all neonatal access that wasn't emergent. The liaison frowned. The policy held. In the aftermath, trust fractured. Parents filed destruction requests for stored blood spots where law allowed it. Clinicians demanded study identifiers and charts, or no samples left the building. Public statements hedged, no contamination found, instruments validated, patient safety ensured. The county epidemiologist, the one who opened the spreadsheet, published an anonymized analysis. The cluster existed. The markers aligned in time more than phenotype. She didn't name causes. She didn't use the word window. The sliver that survived, the FOIA line, the audit timestamps, the visible courier shifts, didn't solve the mystery. They did something else. They made silence wobble. When the blackout curtains fluttered, you could see the room behind them. Not clearly, just enough to know it isn't empty. What we can say, what we can't, and what matters. Here's where we land after the cluster and the wobble. We can say recurring descriptive patterns exist. Nurses in separate hospitals described the same dimming, buffer language, and late-night pilots. Labs saw the same validation flags bloom on the same nights. Families inside corridors logged similar wake times, temperature dips, and calmer outcomes under darker, cooler rooms. Those aren't one-off anecdotes, they're repetitions across years and zip codes. We can also say institutions guard the scene. FOIA bodies arrive with the same silhouette, unconventional performance in the air next to operational flexibility in biomedical flows. Vendor layers blur custody. Redactions thicken exactly where flight meets blood. Policy allows it. Dual-use genomics frameworks legitimize retention and secondary use while carve-outs preserve national security discretion. That posture isn't rumor. It's in memos, contracts, and the way liaisons move at 2 a.m. We can say public pipelines already enable quiet monitoring. Newborn screening captures near-universal baselines. Residual blood spots sit in archives by default in many states. Consumer wearables export sleep and HRV to clouds that integrate with wellness platforms. Military resilience programs add their own data. None of this proves intent. All of it proves capacity. A careful actor can surf those currents without owning them. We can't say a formal genetic contract exists. No signature, no clause, no document that names tall whites and grants access. We can't attribute authorship of etiquette to a non-human party. The same behaviors fit human programs chasing sensor hygiene, clinical comm, and logistics. We can't prove engineered long-game edits. The shifts we've heard about, vitamin D tolerance, circadian resilience, vestibular robustness, remain hypotheses until blinded, pre-registered, replicated data shows convergent anomalies that survive hostile audits. We can't cleanly separate psyops, black biomed, and opportunistic contact, if contact exists. The Venn diagram is mud. That's not a dodge, it's where the evidence stops. When you see courtesy reciprocated at scale, you suspect a counterpart. When you see redactions shield sources and methods, you suspect only a program. Both suspicions can be wrong. Either could be right. What matters isn't which camp wins the argument. What matters is consent, custody, and control. If selection pressure rides on routine care, consent must stop being a sleepy checkbox. Parents need plain language. What's drawn, where it goes, how long it stays, who can touch it, and how to destroy it. Pilot, without a study number, doesn't enter the room. Emergency means declared emergency, not convenient opacity. Data custody needs locks we can trust. Default retention flips to default discard unless an awake parent opts in. Any secondary use links to a visible IRB and shows up in the chart. Chain of custody moves under hospital control, with vendor names on file and auditable access logs shared with independent watchdogs. If defense priorities intersect, the carve-out gets public notice, limited scope, and automatic sunset. Independent audits stop being favors. Hospitals invite third-party reviews of neonatal pipelines. States publish residual blood spot flows, partners, and retention spans. Labs disclose validation bursts, not patient data, just volume and timing, to let communities spot windows without naming causes. Wearable platforms offer true local-only modes with verifiable code, so homes can be private by design, not promise. On the personal level, families build practical agency. Track sleep and health simply. Paper works, so you own the record. Control light. Warmer evenings, darker nights, morning sun. Control noise. Steady low hums tame startle without broadcasting your life to a cloud. Ask for study numbers. Say clinical care only when you're tired. If someone needs 10 minutes, ask for names, roles, and a reason. You can repeat later. And then we measure, exactly as laid out. Blinded sampling, pre-registered targets, ruthless confounds, hostile replication. If the patterns fall, we retire a story and keep the ethics. If they survive, we narrow attribution with data, not vibes. Either way, the scene gets guardrails. Because policy shouldn't wait for proof of visitors to honor consent. And families shouldn't need cluster events to win a right they already have at noon and lose at 2 a.m. If evolution is being negotiated in back rooms, the smallest decisions on night shifts set the first terms families live with. If you want more than whispers, actual documents, protocols you can apply tomorrow, and audits you can run, we're building them next. Subscribe and watch our follow-up on the policy loopholes and data custody fixes. Drop questions that need answers, not theories, and keep your lights under your control.